All right, you're coming live to Credlin here. There's no normal opening to the show because we have extraordinary events coming out of Israel there. We're at the Ben Gurion airport. You can see Air Force One is there on the tarmac, and this truly is an historic day, not just in the Middle East, but in politics right around the world. We hope this is the commencement of peace with the return of hostages. And of course, to secure the peace, we have arriving now into Israel the President of the United States, the man who withstood the calls from around the world to recognise a Palestinian state a couple of weeks ago in the United Nations. And by standing firm, he and Arab states and Israel have delivered this peace, despite, of course, what our Prime Minister in Australia might want to say, that recognising Palestine brought today to fruition. Our thoughts and prayers are obviously with the families of everyone connected to those hostages as we wait and hold our breath around the world that they will actually be delivered now to those they love. Joining me now, Sky News political contributor Chris Yeoman. Chris, welcome. As I said, it's an unusual start to the show. We can see why that is. We've got Benjamin Netanyahu there, of course, the Prime Minister of Israel. We've got the President of Israel, other dignitaries there, Mike Huckabee and others on the tarmac. If there are any comments from Donald Trump to the media, we will cut in immediately and bring them to our viewers. But give me your reflections on what is an extraordinary day in Israel.
Well, Peter, this is unalloyed good news. It's 737 days since those horrific attacks on October 7 when 251 hostages were taken, people were brutalised, and that's what began all this, and we can never forget that, and those people have been held hostage ever since. Many of them have died. Now we've seen 7 people released. We're hoping to see 20 released, and of course no one will relax until every single one of those hostages is back with their families and the bodies of those who have died are returned to their loved ones. And so this day is a momentous day in this particular war, but of course it is the first step along a long and difficult path. What we will see in exchange is there will be a 2,000, more than 2,000 hostages will be, not hostages, more than 2,000 Palestinians will be released by Israel. Among them will be some hardened Hamas fighters. So, of course, that does mean those people will go back to Hamas. And as we see Israel retreat from the front line and move back to a different position where it begins to return some of that territory, the concern, of course, would be that Hamas will start to take up that space again. Of course, they're armed. So what we need to see from the international community is that void being filled by those states in the Middle East that can do something about it.
Yeah, we'll get to a discussion of those prisoners that will be released because, as you say, there are 2,000 of them. There has been prisoners exchanged for hostages all the way through the last 2 years. There are also reports that 135 of them are set to be released and leave Israel. I would have concerns that the Australian government need to rule out the return of any of these Palestinian prisoners into Australia. We know we've taken 3,000 Gazans on visas to date, tourism, short-term visas, of course, but once in Australia, a lot of them have been now transferred onto protection visa applications. So for people at home, they are trying to remain in Australia as refugees. So we'll stay with that issue, of course, for the domestic implications potentially for Australia, Chris. But your broader point, reports today that already Hamas police force operatives are back on the streets of Gaza. Whether they call themselves a different organisation, there is genuine concern that the people who will return to running Gaza will be those of the terrorist stripe of Hamas in some other guise. And of course, that is critical to this being a lasting peace, that the terrorism activity that we have seen for many years, basically since the Israelis left the Gaza Strip about 15 years ago, that cannot return to this area of land that's not just dominated world news for 2 years, but I have to say has seen the West turn itself inside out. We've seen protests on our streets. We've seen the scourge, the return of anti-Semitism. And these are the things that as much as we want to see peace return to Israel, we want to see peace return to our city streets and our Australian community as well.
Yeah, and I fear, Peter, that all of that next step will be very hard, both what happens in Israel and what happens in Australia after this, because it seems to me the large group of Australians is intent on the fact that it wants to see Israel wiped from the face of the earth in the same way that Hamas does. They're not interested in a two-state solution. If they are chanting from the river to the sea, they're talking about erasing the state of Israel. They're not talking about anything else. So those people inside our own borders are of deep concern to us. And inside Gaza, of course, it's going to be what does happen from now on. Now, that's a very detailed plan that the President of the United States has agreed with others, but that now has to see the next steps take shape. And those next steps, the most important part of that is that there not be a void in Gaza as the Israeli Defence Force begins to move out of the areas it now occupies, because obviously Hamas will try and fill that space. Now, I know there's been talk about a board that will run all of this, but there needs to be troops that will take the place and can enforce some kind of peace in Gaza that disarms Hamas. Now, of course, they would never want that. So this is where all of this stuff from here on in gets ridiculously difficult.